是2013年诺贝尔经济学奖得主。他曾在20世纪90年代后期美国股市不断创造历史新高之时，凭借基本面分析，以一部非理性繁荣准确预测了互联网泡沫。他多次到访中国，并提及对中国房地产的看法，称中国房地产泡沫严重。他如何看待中国经济发展的放缓
I understand that China has never had a recession.
他为什么说美国股市一直存在泡沫
The problem with bubbles is that nobody really knows how to predict the turning point. And I don't know that it's imminent at all.
他又会如何评价新任美联储主席耶伦
She's a very level-headed and studious person.
网易财经意见中国专访耶鲁大学经济系教授罗伯特·席勒，精彩内容即将呈现。
China's recent economic data shows a sign of weakness. Maintaining economic growth rate at 7.5% is under a lot of pressure. How do you view China's current economic condition?
Well, we've been very impressed with the Chinese miracle that has happened, been going on for decades. And I suppose people in the West are reacting to signs of slowdown that you can see it in the growth rate statistics in China and other emerging countries. You can see it in prices of raw materials such as iron, reflecting a reduced demand from these countries. And it comes as something of a mystery to understand where this comes from. It's normal macroeconomic fluctuations. I understand that China has never had a recession. At least I was told that by Jeffrey Moore, who is a business cycle dater from the NBER years ago, and I still haven't heard of the Chinese recession. But I think that as China develops, these things will happen here too, and it might come as a real shock when you get a real big recession in China. But it's just normal for a vibrant economy. If you are free market and you're letting people do what they want in the markets, there will come a time when they become fearful and pull back.
Many economists are worried that China's economic growth model will come to an end, and the economy will reach a hard landing. What's your view on that?
I don't expect China to reach a hard landing. I think that the economic growth rate of China will inevitably gradually decline, just as it does for Japan. Japan was earlier on the road to free market modernization. But if you look at the growth rate of the Japan economy, it has just steadily declined from right after World War II. It was phenomenal in the 50s and 60s. But in the process, they've reached advanced, fully advanced country standards of living. So that's the kind of trajectory that I think is likely for China. It's going to be harder and harder to get 7.5% growth. But you have to understand that that's what's predicted by these mathematical models that growth theorists put out, that it's a transition path. It's not a steady state growth path that China is on. But then we look forward to the day when China becomes a leader for world growth. It will be more moderate, but it will be part of innovation product. As China gets more modern, we increasingly start looking to China for inspiration and start learning from business methods in China. And that's a normal process of integration. I think the world economy is becoming more and more integrated, and China will have to be part of that process of integration as it continues to grow.
A few days ago, China suffered its first corporate bond default in recent history. How do you view this phenomenon?
There's always the possibility of default in any loan market, and as they liberalize and make more loans, possibly to lower credit quality people, that risk goes up. but it's masked by the fact that it doesn't. A credit crisis can come up suddenly, and because they feed on each other. When there's a default in one sector, it tends to bring on defaults in other sectors. So it's not. It's something that comes as a big surprise when it happens. But I don't know that there's any such crisis in the immediate offing in China. Not that I know of. It can always happen, but probably not immediately.
What are the differences and similarities between China and the U.S. housing market bubble? Do you think the Bernanke bubble will trigger a financial crisis, just like the U.S. did during 2008?
It could. I'm not predicting it. I'm thinking that Chinese investors don't have as many opportunities to spread around the world as Americans do. So there's a talk that there's sort of a captive audience for real estate investment, which will gradually be, that will be removed, that support, as China's capital flows are liberalized. I think also China is in such a rapid growth period. It's very hard to price assets when growth is at a high level. The future matters more. In a stable economy that's not going anywhere, you have a pretty good idea what things are worth. So it could stimulate people's imagination excessively in China. So I'm not surprised that there's real estate bubbles in China, just as there are in India, which is also, even Turkey has had real estate bubble-like behavior. All economies that have been growing well, not quite as well as China. So it seems like China ought to be the most vulnerable to real estate bubbles because the transition is so enormously fast here.
How do you view China's local government debt?
Well, I'm not an expert on Chinese local government debt. I'm concerned, though, that as an outsider, there might be a risk that local governments could overdo that. And I'm basing that on historical examples. But again, I can't say they're relevant necessarily to China. But this morning, I was talking at the NDRC, and I gave them an example of, from long ago history, what happened to the United States in local government debt. And there were two main crises, one in the 1830s and another one in the 1870s. In the 1830s, state governments, the 30s one is perhaps more relevant, the state governments in the United States launched an ambitious program of improvements, canals, highways, railroads. They all did it at once. There was something in the atmosphere that they got extremely optimistic. But then a crisis came, and the projects weren't done, and the state governments ran out of money, and 9 of the U.S. states went bankrupt. We have not had a crisis like that since, because almost every state government changed its regulations to prevent states from borrowing too much. And so we've gone like almost 200 years without another state bankruptcy. So now I just wonder how China fits in to that sort of thing. China is newly reformed after Deng Xiaoping, and they haven't had crises. You normally learn from crises. And I'm wondering if somehow your local governments might, and again, I don't know this, but your local governments might be overly influenced by the rapid Chinese growth, lulled into complacency about what might happen in a crisis.
Do you have any advice to solve the so-called shadow banking issue in China?
Well, it's a difficult problem because shadow banks have emerged as an important source of financing in China. And shadow banks, I imagine, I believe, are more imaginative and more likely to support original entrepreneurial activity. So I kind of like shadow banks, just as I like crowdfunding and other they're new and they're more adventuresome. The only thing is that they have to be regulated. And right now, I think the first thing for the Chinese government to do is study them and learn more about them, because my impression is the government is not completely clear on what they're even doing. And that's the same problem that the U.S. had. The shadow banks were a new sector, and the new sector is in its creativity becomes inscrutable as well. So I think that the first step is to fund regulators' research, give them the power to demand information, and the next steps will follow.
Do you have any suggestions for China's current economic and financial reforms?
I don't know. I have written books with many possible reforms, and they apply to every country. So China is no longer it's no longer in an early stage of emerging. It's in a late stage. It's coming along very nicely. So all of the different proposals that I've given would apply to China as well. I guess the thing that comes to mind first, though, regarding specifically China, is to loosen capital requirements and allow capital flow restrictions to allow China to become more part of the world of finance. So you still have difficulties in investing all over the world, and that's something that I would look forward to seeing changed.
How do you view the current development of internet finance in both U.S. and China?
Legal structures are so different in the two countries. Crowdfunding has been illegal in the United States because of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates securities, won't recognize it. Well, now they just passed the Jobs Act that now legalizes crowdfunding, but subject to regulation, which hasn't been completed yet.
What's your primary concern for China in the long run?
One view that I have, which may not be popular here, is that the Chinese people will be much more dispersed around the world than they are now. And I worry less about the Chinese people than about the people left behind. So what's the probability that you will spend the rest of your life in China? Pretty low, right? You will be living in Frankfurt or what's happening in the world today is that we're developing two cultures, a cosmopolitan culture of people who are educated and worldly, and a local culture of people who stay in their original town and are afraid to leave because they don't understand the world. And so I worry more about the local Chinese rather than about China. And I'm thinking that we may see trouble in this century that is along different dimensions. It's about frictions between the cosmopolitan people and the locals. That's just imaginary. You're asking me to come up with something. By the way, if you want to know, I wrote an article called In 100 Years, for a book called In 100 Years that just came out by MIT Press last month. And so I wrote just one chapter of the book. But if you read them all together, it's almost dazzling, the amount of uncertainty facing the world today. And the corporations now don't belong to one country anymore. They're changing so fast, and people's roles in the new economy are changing so fast. I feel a sense of great uncertainty about the future, and so that uncertainty. I know it's not really about China; it's about all of us, and the uncertainties are not specific to any one country.
How do you view the current Ukraine crisis? Is that going to hurt the European Union's economic recovery?
Well, one can think of scenarios that would hurt the recovery. First of all, Western penalties on Russia could harm the Russian economy. There could be retaliation, economic retaliation from Russia. There could be a cutoff of Russian oil supplies, which would help throw Europe into a recession. So it does create. I don't think this crisis is good for business at all. So it does have the potential to create another recession. So far, it hasn't had that effect, and the markets haven't responded with great trepidation. Some people think that Putin is done for now. That this isn't Crimea looks to Putin like part of Russia, and that's really what he's thinking. That he's not really on the march, and that everything will, so that the world economy won't suffer. But there's definitely a risk. These things can spin out of hand.
What are the possible scenarios when QE ends? Do you think the U.S. economy's recovery could continue?
Well, that is an interesting question because quantitative easing has been so massive that many people describe the current U.S. economy as artificial. It's not just quantitative easing, it's also risk management, that the government assumes the risk of default of most new mortgages through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Housing Administration. It's never been like this before. We're in an experimental stage. Now, you asked me what are the scenarios that I think that it will probably end all right. Now, eventually, we'll have a recession, as we always do. We always come back into them. Then we'll see how our new procedures interact with the new recession. We might discover that there are problems. We had the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010 that created a new resolution procedure for failing financial institutions. The procedure has never been tested, so we'll find out if it works. There's some worry that the implementers of these new procedures won't be aggressive enough to act decisively to prevent the fallout from another crisis. So there is still a risk of a serious financial crisis, but that's the expectation. Aftershock after the last one is always a possibility. But at this point, it seems like we're recovering very slowly, that the taper will be slow, and there won't be any foreseeable shocks. The housing market has been growing very strongly in the United States. That could reverse, and the whole thing could happen all over again. I'm just not forecasting that right now.
You've done a lot of research on financial bubbles. And how do you view the current U.S. stock market? The Dow and the S&P 500 has already at a historical high level. And is that another round of irrational exuberance?
Well, I think that the U.S. stock market has always had bubbles. It's not anything unusual. It's like other ones. Now, one difference has been that we've shown very rapid earnings growth since 2009. And so if you look at a conventional price-earnings ratio, it doesn't look extremely elevated. But the rapidity of the earnings growth makes me think that it's suspicious. And I've been advocating computing price-earnings ratios using long averages of earnings, not just last year's earnings. And if you do that, then the market looks quite pricey right now. And that's a concern. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if it turned around someday and fell sharply. I'm just not going to tell you what the day is, and it might go up quite a bit more before there's any correction. The problem with bubbles is that nobody really knows how to predict the turning point, and I don't know that it's imminent at all.
How's Fed's tapering affect the emerging market?
Well, people were very concerned about the effects of the announcement of tapering on emerging markets. So it appears to many people that Fed tightening would harm the emerging economies. On the other hand, the Fed will only do this when the economy looks robust anyway. So it might not, why should it have a profound negative impact on emerging economies? We've had much higher interest rates, and China was growing at a very even higher rate than it is now. So I think it's probably all right and not something to worry about.
Last year, we see a new round of currency depreciation in many emerging countries such as Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, and Indonesia. Why does this happen?
It's hard to understand. These are markets that are not very highly understandable. If you look at specific countries, you can come up with stories. Some people, for the case of Japan, that depreciated very sharply, they would link it to perhaps the shutting down of the nuclear reactors in Japan after the Fukushima crisis, and that created a huge demand for oil, which from Japan, and coal. But that's a specific explanation. So why are all the emerging countries? I think that there is some concern about political instability in these countries. In Brazil, Dilma Rousseff has been getting protests. There are these street protests against the way the economy is going. We're seeing violent protests in Venezuela. In Turkey, there's disenchantment with the level of corruption in the government. So why all these things happen at once, I don't exactly know. It's a matter of speculation, but I think that there is a little bit less optimistic feeling. and Russia, with their newly aggressive stance, it doesn't encourage optimism for investors in Russia.
Do you see the potential of a new round of global financial crisis?
I haven't been forecasting a global economic crisis, but it wouldn't be a surprise, yeah, because these are chain of events type things that can go badly. So most people were very surprised by Ukraine. Just how many months ago they weren't even on our map. We weren't worried about them at all. What will happen next is always uncertain.
How do you evaluate the performance of former Fed Chairman Mr. Bernanke?
I think that he started out weak in not recognizing the crisis as it happened. But once the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, became clear, he did take aggressive steps. They looked quite aggressive because the balance sheet went up from $1 trillion to almost $4 trillion. And that is a hugely aggressive policy. I think that he helped coordinate with other central bankers around the world to get a coordinated response to this crisis. So in the end, he vindicated himself for not having foreseen the crisis by having dealt decisively with it.
How about the Fed's new chairman, Janet Yellen? Do you think is there going to be any differences after she took office?
Well, not much has changed. She just took office about a little over a month ago. So it doesn't look much different. I know Janet Yellen. She's an old friend of mine. She's the wife of my co-author on my book. So I'm biased, perhaps. I'm feel proud of her that she's gotten this position. But I also believe in her. I think she's a very level-headed and studious person. And she has been part of the past policy. She's been a strong voice because she was vice chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. Looks like there'll be a new vice chairman, will be Alan Blinder. It's another person that I respect very much. And as head of the Bank of Israel, he did a great job. So I think we're in good hands, and I'm thinking that the scenario will be benign. There is a tapering to do and a disengagement from a highly expansionary policy, and that has some uncertainties, but I'm expecting it will go all right.